Absolutely, yeah. Thanks everybody for making it. I know it's a Wednesday afternoon, so I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I want to make sure that what we're talking about actually matches some of the things that you have. So I know we'll do a Q&A at the end, but I want to make sure the topics resonate as best as possible. So if there are questions or other things you want to hear, make sure we uncover what those things are. As William mentioned, we run an organizational development, I say we because there's a team, but we run an organizational development consulting entity. And we have an operating system we call the Five Facets of Business. The Five Facets of Business looks at culture, strategy, operations, story, and finance. And what we're looking for is each one of those pillars able to stand on its own, and is there alignment between those five things? And often what we see is many organizations say, oh, we have a leads problem. Oh, we have an operations problem. We need to document processes a little bit more effectively. Oh, I don't really know what the numbers are in the finances. It's difficult to read the P&L. Whatever those issues might be. And the challenge is they often are looking at those things in isolation. And so they take isolated approaches to solve those problems, and then they fix one thing, and then they break something else because they were fixing one thing at a time. And so we do our best to come in as an outsider, look at that organization and say, okay, if we zoomed out a little bit, what do we see? What are the obstacles? What are the issues? And what does that tell us from a collective perspective that we need to take from a comprehensive approach? What we often find is most organizations are good at 2 or 3 of those pillars, and they feel really good or solid in those things, and maybe 2 are creating drag for everything else, right? You may have a great culture, you may have a great strategy, and you feel really good about it, but you can't get the deliveries out the door, your service is failing, all that kind of stuff is happening. And so it's starting to create a little drag on the culture, and maybe the strategy is starting to drag a little bit, whatever it might be. So we try to take a systems approach, not a symptoms approach, to organizational design and development to see how we can elevate the business for whatever that might be. I'll stop there.
Makes sense.
Good.
I would imagine most businesses in that $55 to $50 million range, if you take a look at the 2 areas where they excel at, they excel at those 2 areas because that's where the founder excels at. Is that a fair assessment or not?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's usually bound to who your leadership team is and what or if you have a leadership team. If not, if it's just a couple co-founders, whatever it might be, they tend to have biases. They tend to have certain strength areas and other areas that fall behind. And so it really is tied to that leadership. I think that's really astute. Good for you.
It's because of the hat.
Yeah. But the other place I would take that is often what we see in the 5-ish million range is there are stage gates, right? Like what got you to 5 million isn't going to get you to 10. And what got you to 10 isn't going to get you to 20. There's these, we call it kind of hitting the complexity threshold, which is, hey, what got us to 5 million? Our founders, our leaders were doing X, Y, and Z. We're really good at, delivering our service and product to 5 million, and then they cap. And what happens then is you start to see what we call kind of downward spiral thinking, which is, oh, this is broken, and well, this is broken because this other thing isn't happening, and oh, we should get into AI a little bit more, and oh, we should be doing this thing, we should be doing this thing, and systems start to fail. They're not operating as efficiently as they could, but generally it's because they hit the complexity threshold. We push that system to its edges. And now that we're seeing those edges, we start to see a lot of symptoms, and we start to see things stack, so to speak, or compound. And as those things compound, then the leadership team gets more frustrated. And really, truly, it's not that they're incapable of leading or that things are broken. They've really just pushed that system about as far as it would go. And in order to go from 5 million to 10 million, you have to redesign, reshape, and modify that system, including how leaders lead the organization. So one of the bigger challenges is matching the operating system and the behaviors of the leadership team. And when those 2 things line up, that's when you get that outsized growth or that transition out of a stage gate.
Stage gate, you mentioned it twice. Different business types have different places where they hit that complexity threshold. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
How do you identify that?
It's a good question. I would say if you're in a professional services space, agencies tend to hit it a little faster. It's hard to scale where time equals money. Is generally a harder thing to scale fast or scale at volume. Products or services tend to scale a little bit more efficiently. It depends. We've worked with manufacturing groups, we've worked with industrial real estate groups. It's different thresholds for those stages, so I don't always like to say, oh, at 3 million, everybody experiences X, Y, and Z. It really depends on the business model. But I'd also say, from how do you identify that? It's often with the business model itself. Like, what's our core business? What do we do? If I asked any one of you in the room, if I said, okay, what do you do? Like, what's the core business? I would imagine about 80% of you would take me on a long walk. You'd say, well, we do this, and then we also kind of do this thing, and then, well, sometimes we do this thing over here, and then we add this. And usually to me, that's a good sign of, oh, okay, we're actually creating or pushing towards complexity, and what we need to do is simplify that core delivery system, what it is we actually do, to get back to something that is scalable. So I find it fascinating how many people can't answer that question cleanly, and it's not a judgment. I probably can't very easily, if I'm being honest. But being able to say, well, we do this, and we have designed ourselves to do that thing, whatever that might be, if it's an agency model, if it's financial planning, like we are designed to do that, and it's simple, knowable, repeatable, and scalable. Okay, now we have a ratchet opportunity. So if that becomes unclear, or the edges of that start breaking, or we've added too many things, is usually a good indicator of we're pushing that complexity line. We've kind of found the edges of our current way of operating.
What's the trick question?
Ooh.
I like trick questions. What's the easiest thing to fix of the five, right? So you think culture, strategy, operations, story, finances. Is there one that's easier? Is the one that you run across all the time and say, I know it's going to be like, hey, even before you walk in the door, and all we have to do is X, Y, Z? Or do they each bring their own complexity matrices to it?
Yeah, they each have their own matrices. The one I see that is either avoided or loved is the financial category. Like, either you love it or it's like, yeah, I don't know what that is, and I don't want to touch it. Here, you do it. Like putting it out on an accounting firm or whatever that might be. I find though that the organizations that are really lockstep financially and know those numbers, and it's really clean and it's managed really well, tend to have better other categories. I would say of the five, typically strategy is the one that is underdone. And I want to caveat that with, it's not that we're not strategic, it just tends to be more action planning than actual strategic planning. I think a lot of how organizations strategically plan is, well, who's doing what this quarter and what are you going to do? It's like, well, that's action planning. We're planning what it is that we're going to do. Or you might hear, well, that's our, we're going to start using social media, or we're going to start using AI. And you're like, well, that's a tactic. That's a tool. That's a thing that you're going to do. But what's the strategy? What does it actually allow to happen? And what pillar is that going to get us to? So strategy tends to be a category that I think is underdone in a lot of small businesses. It tends to become who's doing what, how are we going to get there? Let's push. And it becomes operational or execution heavy, when really getting clear about what do we do and what do we not do, which is truly what strategy is. We do this, not this, and making that distinction.
So, it's funny that financially minded people, I don't know what allows them to have maybe a longer runway before things start to break. Do you see why that would be? Before I go on, just think about it strategically. Why do financially minded people tend to break later than other folks?
They tend to have more health, generally speaking.
They got more profit. They got more.
Well, because they just know what cash level they have, and they make decisions based on actual money, actual dollar amounts, not like, oh, I think we have enough money, let's hire this person. You're like, no, hold on, wait, like how much money do you have? I'll give you a quick entrepreneur I've been around for a few years who has lost two businesses. Amazing salesperson, total visionary, can stand something up, can get something going, and as soon as it turns into, we need to structure this, I still think to this day, despite all of my effort, doesn't really understand what profit is. And so overspends, overextends, overdeals, does all that, and then 24 months later, the business shuts down because they don't have any money and they can't make it happen. You're like, well, okay. So if he was surrounded by a financially minded person who could help make those decisions, it's an extreme example, but the truth is, I think most of us, myself included, think we have a pretty decent grasp of what's actually happening financially or what's actually happening from a numbers perspective. And sometimes we see what we want to see versus what's actually happening. So that true, clean data on the financial side truly matters from a decision-making perspective. And it's why we talk about it as alignment between the systems, because you can have great financial information, but if you have a bad strategy, it doesn't really matter. Right? If you have a great strategy, but you don't have the finances or ops to do it, it doesn't really matter. Right? You actually need to have all of those pillars taken care of in order to achieve the next level.
Well, then you can have a great financial system and a great strategy, but your culture blows, or stinks, or whatever is the more appropriate PC thing to say these days.
It's windy.
So, but if your culture is not there to kind of get through some of the hard points of building through it, then the system collapses on itself anyways, right?
Absolutely. Well, and I'll riff on culture a little bit because I think it's important, because culture is created whether it's intentional or not, right? So like you said, around, even like the different facets, leaders are often indicative of who the leader is. Culture is the same. I like to borrow Seth Godin's definition of culture. He says, people like us do things like this. And I love that definition. It's the simplest version of culture that I've ever heard. People like us, which is we believe these things. So think about that as, purpose or mission, vision, values, people like us, and then do things like this. We act in this way. So think about that from a behavior perspective or a ritual perspective. And so if you want to have a culture, or you want to have an entity that cares about financial health or cares about those types of things, define that as do things like this. And more often than not, it's pretty rare that I've met an organization that doesn't have some variation of values or some variation of a mission statement. I think pretty much everybody knows that's kind of business basics at this point in time. And I would argue that about 40% do it well. And about 60% just put it up on the wall and they're like, oh yeah, no, we care about these things. It's totally great. And then we never talk about it again. Nobody's held to account on it. We haven't defined what it looks like on the ground. We haven't made it tangible or real. And so, really the leader's floor becomes everybody else's ceiling. It's like whatever you tolerate, then is everybody else's target. So culture really, I think, weaves its way through all of them in many ways.
Would you say it's the glue that holds things together over time? Or is there no real, would you say any one of them are the glue? Or no?
I mean, they're all necessary. They're all important. They all have different pieces. I think culture is the one that is the least tangible, but can be more tangible than it's often created as.
The process, right? Like for us, oftentimes we think about us, and so I can relate it back to you. So financial planning is kind of sort of hot topics, right? Like it's cash, taxes, retirement, insurance, estate planning. And oddly enough, we usually tackle, in an ideal world, we tackle estate planning last because it allows us to know the most about the client, right? But the reality is most of the time clients come to us and the thing that's breaking the most is estate planning. Because they hadn't updated their documents in 25 years since their second kid or third kid or whatever kid was born. That was the last time they updated it. So when somebody comes in, like how do you start a cycle through? Is it what's breaking, or is there a problem? Like what's the right way to start working with the business executive team, whoever it is, to identify what's breaking, what's working, and then how do you start to tackle the choke point?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I like to use an analogy here. So I'll throw that up, and I want to start it with, generally people come with what we refer to as lagging indicators, like what's breaking, they can see it, right? So like people aren't getting their job done, sales are down, we're not hitting our numbers, whatever it might be. Like those are the things that are tangible that you can see, feels like.
We're the business owners up at 2 o'clock in the morning, they can't speak with heartburn. And
Right.
it doesn't go out to speak till 4 o'clock in the morning.
I can't feel like I can make this decision, I gotta decide this thing, and you're feeling that level of stress, absolutely. Those are typically the things that people bring to us, but those are the end point. Like that's where we've gotten to. What I want to know is like, yeah, but what are the things that are happening over here that are leading to that, right? Like what is that actually teaching us about the core issue? So think about it in terms of symptoms versus the disease. I want to know what the disease is. So the analogy we like to use is if you think of, like if you have kids or you were a kid at some point in time, right? Everybody here was. If you ever did a connect the dots exercise, right? Where 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, whatever, you connect the dots and then it's an elephant. Great. We all have a general idea of what it's going to look like before we connect all the dots. But if you run an organization, more often than not, you're holding 10 dots. And your teammate is holding 10 dots. And somebody else is holding 10 dots. And somebody else is holding 10 dots. And the problem is we often see, somebody will throw a dot out and we'll say, oh, we got to solve that thing. Oh, and then we got to solve that thing. Oh, we got to solve that thing. And so if your operations person is complaining about an issue, it's like, well, that's the back left leg of the elephant. And if the salesperson is frustrated about it, it's like, oh, they're telling me that the trunk is a problem. And if I solve each of those things individually, or if I only see those things as individual actions, I'm not truly solving the problem because I'm not seeing the whole story. So my job as a leader in an organization, or my job as the outsider looking at your organization, is to say, what's the story behind the story? Keep throwing the dots. Keep telling me what's happening. What are the themes? What are we identifying from a larger narrative perspective so we can come back and fix the root challenges that we're seeing? I'll give you a really clean example. I'm doing work with a sales team right now. It's probably been 6 weeks since we made this shift. But I was working with the sales team and I kept hearing the phrase, well, I don't know when they're going to get back to me. I don't know when they're going to get back to me, right? Well, you were in a meeting with this person. When's the next call? I don't know. They said they get back to me in a couple of weeks, and I followed up, and I'm not hearing anything. I just kept hearing that. And I'm like, well, did you set the next meeting? Do you know when the next meeting is? So when you end that conversation, did you set the next conversation? No, it's not really like a thing we do. Okay. Well, yours came to me because your sales numbers are down, which is the end. Like you're not hitting your sales targets. So the question is like, well, should we fire our salespeople? It's like, I don't know, maybe. I don't know if they're competent or not. Have we created the conditions for them to be competent? Have we created the conditions for them to be successful? What are the controllable actions that lead to the outputs that we're looking for? And so we created a metric, and the metric was, if you're in a sales conversation, if you're talking to a human, you have to schedule the next meeting. That should be a 1-to-1 correlation. So we started measuring that. And as we started measuring that, sales closes increased 30% in month 1. Just by that simple action to change how they were operating. No, we don't need to fire your salespeople. They're actually pretty good. They just needed to understand what that root problem was for what it is that they're doing. I give that as an example to kind of show the difference between a lagging and a leading indicator. You all know what this is. I'm not trying to be condescending at all. But I'm just trying to show an example of often we come with this end result, this outcome isn't happening. And if we only look at the outcome, we're going to be looking at the wrong place 95% of the time. It's, okay, well, what got us there? Can we walk backwards and figure out what's happening over here? How are we creating the conditions for that outcome to be more true or to be more likely?
2 separate businesses. So I'll put it out there, and you have to solve these within 7 minutes. You got one business that is $30 to $35 million a year that caps out and kind of chokes on itself on a regular basis, and then spins wheels. And then you've got the opposite business that is rapidly expanding. It's gone from 5 million to 10 million to 20 million to 35 million, right? Whatever it is. So the business that's choking itself has a separate set of issues, and then the business that can't keep up with itself has a separate set of issues. How do you solve those problems?
Yeah.
7 minutes. Go.
Okay. All right. Scenario number 1, $30 to $35 million business that stagnates essentially, or even walks backwards a little bit.
It walks backwards and then it goes back and walks backwards, whatever, right? The song and dance you've seen before.
Yeah. I would say typically what I see from a leadership perspective is they've got kind of what we call the linear thinking trap. And linear thinking is, well, if we can just do this a little bit more efficiently, if we can just do this a little bit better, if we can just squeeze a little bit more juice out of the system. How many of you, if I said, okay, let's say you were a $3 million business, and I said, okay, what do you want to be at the end of 2026? I have this conversation with people a lot. 95% of the time, people say 3.2 million, 3.4, 3.3, somewhere in there, right? It's just, we're going to squeeze the juice. We're going to squeeze a little harder. We're going to do the same thing, just harder. And if I said, okay, where do you want to be 5 years from now? 90% of the people I talk to say 6 million. They double the number, almost without fail. And to me, that is a good indicator of what we call linear thinking. And linear thinking is this idea of, all right, let's just take the next step. Let's take the next step. We're not going to fundamentally change anything about how we operate, regardless of the conditions, because we're comfortable, confident, and certain that we can do 3 million. So what if we did 3.2? Could we do the same thing and get to 6? So linear thinking comes from this concept. There's authors named Keegan and Leahy. I'm going to totally go over 7 minutes. I apologize.
Okay, we'll reference those on YouTube later.
Yeah, all right. We'll drop a note. But Keegan and Leahy have this term that they use. They call it dynamic equilibrium. And dynamic literally is defined as change. So dynamism means to change, to fluctuate, and equilibrium means to come back to middle. And if you think about that term, we as humans often are caught in dynamic equilibrium. We make a lot of decisions and a lot of choices to stay the same, to come back to middle, to come back to what we're comfortable with or what we're certain. And we don't fear change, we fear loss. So as leaders of an organization, I would poke at leadership first. In a $30 to $35 million business that cycles, I would come to that leadership team and I would say, okay, so let's remove this idea of we're a $35 million business. And many of you have read 10X is easier than 2X. I would quite literally just throw out, what if you were a $350 million business? What would it look like? What would you have to do? What would you have to change? What would have to shift? And it's not asking you to be a $350 million business.
Please don't be a $350 business.
Yeah, that would be terrible. But what would you have to do? Just even as a thought experiment. And all that does is it breaks the linear thinking cycle. It's like you can no longer think about it as, well, if we just squeeze a little bit harder, it's, well, we'd have to just stop doing this entirely. We'd have to totally lean on this, and we'd have to get rid of this team. We'd have to drop this person. We'd have to exactly. Right? That's the type of thinking that's going to get you from 35 to 50 and 60. And the longer you're in your business, the harder it is to make that decision. The older you get in life, the harder it is to make that decision. That's not a judgment. That's just reality. Because it feels safe and certain to do the same thing, the same way you did it last year and it worked. Well, let's just do it again and let's just do it harder. So the other business almost has the opposite problem, which is we are thinking we are probably rapidly changing very quickly, and we likely need to slow down and put process and structure and system into place enough where not everybody's running around with their hair on fire all the time.
Is that hiring on the second one, right? On the first one is easy, right? Like you break apart kind of what's causing the stagnation on that rapid growth. With most businesses that we're going to talk about, right? We're not talking about a scaling technology company. We're talking about a construction business of whatever type of manufacturing, industrial, whatever it is. Is it hiring? What is it that what do we break in order to call success?
Yeah. So I was talking to a civil engineering group this morning that's a $20 million business that thinks in the next 5 years they could be a $100 million business.
Bingo. Talk about that.
Yeah, so the question isn't, do we have enough work? Do we have a sales problem? Do we have, et cetera? It's actually, do we have a replacement problem, right? So right now, leadership is trapped in, like the CEO that I was talking to is a business development person, good business developer, goes out, has lots of relationships. There's lots of places they haven't accessed yet because he reads every contract, because he understands the ERP system better than anybody else does. And so he gets pulled into those types of things. And it's like, well, that's the problem, right? Like we don't have a person to help you elevate into a strategic space. So if you're familiar with the author named Dan Martell, he has a really great book called Buy Back Your Time. And in it, he talks about what's called the replacement ladder. And it's a helpful thing to think about when you're in a rapid growth type of scenario, is to think if you are a leader of an organization like that, the replacement ladder goes administration, operations, marketing, sales, strategy. And those are kind of the 5 rungs that any leader is probably connected to. Your job is to figure out, how do I get administrative and operational stuff off of my plate as fast as possible? How do I eventually remove the marketing bucket and potentially the sales bucket so I can just live in the strategic category? And that's not an overnight fix. It's not a quick adjustment. But most of the time, it's the administrative and operational stuff that gets tied to some of your identity. Yeah, but I'm the one that built. I'm the one that knows contracts the best. I'm the one that knows this the best. It's like, great, but you don't have to be the one to do it. And you can probably transfer that knowledge. How do we get that off of your plate in order to then scale the organization effectively?
It's the classic choke point, right? Like everything runs through the business owner. So
there's a reason the bottleneck is at the top of the bottle.
Yeah. Great point. So how do you? So part of that has nothing to do with the culture of the organization. I should say it has nothing to do with it. Bear with me for a second before you judge me.
Those are fighting words.
Yeah. But in a single owner business that's doing that, where the business owner is the choke point, it has something to do with the culture. It also has a lot to do with the business owner.
Correct.
So, which by itself is kind of sort of the culture. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
How do you get the business owner to let go?
Honestly, it's one of the hardest. It's one of the hardest elements. Again, I'd go back to the phrase, people don't fear change, we fear loss. What I would try to do with that business owner is figure out, what are you losing personally by giving those things away? What's keeping you from being able to do that? It is often 3 things: status, certainty, and comfort. And if I can identify what those are, if I can find other opportunities to elevate status or elevate certainty or elevate comfort, they are more likely to find ways to make that change. The other piece is I would make it really small. What are some of the smallest things that you can give away? And how do we just create a habit of giving some of that away so you don't have to, it's often like, well, you have to give every operational thing away. You'd be like, well, hold on. Like, what do you mean?
You're fired.
Right, but if I said, okay, you no longer get to write the Friday newsletter, somebody else has to write the Friday newsletter. It's like, let's just get that thing away. And then you realize that, oh, somebody else can do that pretty well. I'm not going to die. Everything's okay. It turned out all right. Okay, now what's the next thing? And then what's the next thing? And what's the next thing? So if they're really avoidant of that kind of change, I would just figure out, how do I make it as small as possible and do it on repeat over time to gradually, eventually kind of work them through giving some of those things away.
But naturally, they give something away and then it fails because it just breaks, right? They give it to the wrong person.
I've never seen that before. I think that's just you, William. Sorry.
It just didn't.
Word.
Joe Schmo ran into the person in front of him and called it a $100 million lawsuit. I mean, sometimes it just doesn't work, right? And so, like, you coach them to do something and then it just explodes in their face. We keep moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I appreciate you bringing that up because it is true. It's hard. You let something go, it fails, and then you feel like almost like you have to double down and take it over forever.
Yeah, I mean, you complete owner of it at that point in time. Really,
Yeah,
never give that up again. That was a horrible idea.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll buy you a drink, but we're not taking that one to eat.
Exactly. Phrasing I've heard recently that I really like. It's a tactic we've used for a long time, but I really like it from a phrasing perspective, is to delegate outcomes, not tasks, and to be thoughtful about. I think we can sometimes, as a leader who is delegating things, I get trapped in that. I start to get, if I get into the conversation, I know I'm going to have opinions. I know I'm going to be particular about it. So I have to get myself just out of the conversation, generally speaking, and I have to trust my team with, here's the outcome, here's what the end looks like, here's what I'd like for you to be able to accomplish. How you get there, I have to let go of. And I just have to then hold the line on, well, we want, 10% increase in service income in the next year. Okay, great. Can I give that outcome? Can I delegate that thing to a team member? And then, all right, let's strategically talk about how you're going to get there, but don't invite me to the meeting. Get me out of it. If disaster happens, then it becomes, all right, did I create a learning environment where, all right, keep me out of the meeting, but help me understand like how you're going to do this differently next time, and how can I coach you, and then keep me out of it. Knowing full well it's not going to work every time always.
Your 5 facets,
Yeah.
Culture, strategy, operations, story, finances,
Good job.
as a member of clean writer, are your way of helping business owners create their own internal operating system. How often, when you help them create their own internal operating system, how often does that need to be revisited, changed, updated, refreshed, whatever, right? You go from 3 to 6, the business is completely different. You go from 10 to 20, the business is completely different. You go from 40 to 30, the business is completely different, right?
Yeah.
So how do business owners stay on top of it?
Yeah, absolutely. We often use the phrase, we're not offering a solution, we're offering the work. And what we mean by that is, if you think putting an operating system, whether that's EOS, scaling up, 5 facets, whatever the system is, if you think that putting that into your business is a one and done, like, hey, let's just put it in and then we never really have to think about it again, now we do this type of meeting or whatever, like, that's often the failure point. One of the problems we see with implementations of operating systems is they implement a portion of the system and then they think they did all the work, and then they never really talk about it again, they never really do it again, and then 6 months in, they're like, well, this system sucks. You're like, no, it doesn't. It's actually designed pretty well. It was pretty thoughtful. It's that we didn't align the behavioral aspect of it. We didn't kind of put the right leadership approach or the right leadership way of thinking about it in place at the same time to help that system achieve what it's trying to achieve, right? Any of those systems, 5 facets, EOS, scaling up, Pinnacle Group, like, there's no shortage of systems. I'm not trying to advocate for one or the other. The problem we often see is how they get implemented puts a lot of pressure on the system to solve all the problems, and not so much aligning systems and behavior. So when we implement the 5 facets in an organization, we very much do both. It is a hands-on implementation, and we're also trying to increase kind of the long-standing learning environment of that organization, where this is the thing we keep on the table all the time. We are consistently talking about who owns what in the organization. We're consistently talking about, does this meeting structure work? Consistently talking about, are we aligned in operations in the way that we need to be? Are we trapped in linear thinking? Are we caught in those ways? We're trying to create a conditions where leadership is elevated, but so is the business.
So anybody here music fans? We happen to be a family that likes an artist called Billy Strings. And years ago, the backstage manager would always come out to Billy Strings, and they say 10 minutes to showtime, 5 minutes to showtime, 2 minutes to showtime. And Billy got frustrated with his managers, and he said that puts a lot of pressure on me. And so he's like, can you call it something besides showtime? Something besides the countdown? And so the guy was like, how about fuzzy rainbows? He's like, 10 minutes to fuzzy rainbows. And then 5 minutes to fuzzy rainbows. So when Billy comes out and they announce him over stage, and it's the countdown clock, it's always 10 minutes to fuzzy rainbows, 5 minutes to fuzzy rainbows. So what I'm saying is I just got a 5 minutes to fuzzy rainbows from John in the back. We're 5 minutes to 5:15. So anyways, operating systems, they're out there, right?
Yeah.
Choosing the one that fits the business, like it's like anything else, right? It's personality, it's culture, and like how do you help people work through the right fit for what they should walk into?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would go back to kind of assessing where you are, right? Like there's a lot of one-off solutions for particular things, right? Like if you have financial challenges and that is by far the thing that you're experiencing the most, like find a CFO, fractional CFO, find a, whatever it might be, accountant, etc. If that's really the only thing. If you were seeing issues across the organization, there's a lot of different assessments that you can take that'll help you make sense of what that problem or what those challenges are. And to see it a little bit more comprehensively. Again, it's that kind of collecting dots component. From there, then it's, okay, which system meets what we need the most effectively, and which system is actually going to be something that, as it's getting implemented, we're being supported in that implementation in the way that we need to. So, EOS, Scaling Up, Pinnacle, Five Facets, we all implement differently. Right? I would argue we're quite hands-on in the implementation process. It's more of a partnership. In part, we call it like implementation coaching. Like we're supporting you in implementing a process and implementing a system, and then creating behaviors over time. For some organizations, that's necessary and important and effective, and it works. And for some organizations, it's just not the right fit, right? They might need more of the EOS style, which is, all right, we're going to have a meeting. 30 days later, we'll have another meeting, and your job is to implement in between, and it's a little bit more hands-on. That works for some organizations. I'm not saying one's right, one's wrong. They're just different applications of how to put a system into place. So I think there's both, which is the best system for us. Honestly, most of the systems are relatively similar in terms of the tools that they put in place. It's what do you need from an application and implementation perspective that's going to make it stick, last, and actually achieve the results that you're trying to achieve. I heard a really good quote today from a different client. It said, we're not getting paid, you're getting paid for results, not for attempts. And I thought that was pretty good. So if you're going to spend money on something like this, figure out, well, which is the one that's most likely going to give us the results that we're looking for, not necessarily we just felt like we did an attempt and we feel good about that. It's, but are we actually achieving, are we actually solving the problems that we're aiming to solve?
Well, I'll take it a step further as we round out time on thanks as always.
Was it fuzzy rainbows?
It's almost, it's not quite. Okay. But I might take the whole time, so I apologize if I do. As you walk through those things, culture, strategy, operations, story, finances, right? We didn't really touch on story as much as we could have because it's I love story. I think story wins the day all the time, right? Like if you can tell a good story, there's 1,000 books out there about telling good stories and how it works. But as you walk through those different things in finances, like there are problems, and there's challenges, and there's some cussing, and there's some hatred, and there's a boatload of frustration that goes through those different types of processes, right? And when that's the case, like trust matters, right? Like you have to trust a couple of different things. You have to trust the process. You have to trust the system that's there to support you, and then you have to trust the person that's across the table from you. Because if you don't trust the process and you don't trust the person, then when it gets difficult and you say, I said cussing, so I apologize for anybody that doesn't like cussing. You say shit and you give up, right? It's too hard. It's not working. I don't trust him. He's not saying the right things, and you walk in. When things get difficult, you have to trust the process. You have to trust the person, right? Otherwise, it doesn't work because you quit. You go into the next thing, and you're constantly shifting gears.
Yeah. Well, and trust is an outcome, right? There are conditions that lead to trust, But one of the things I want to mention, maybe is the last thing I think, in the fuzzy rainbows, is each one of those facets in every organization has essentially 3 layers that are taking place at all the time, right? So there's what we call the clarity layer, the alignment layer, and the execution layer. So even within those pillars, like even within culture, people like us do things like this, right? People like us is the clarity layer. It's us saying like, yeah, but where are we going? So if I ask you the question, if we were going to go hiking together, what's the first question we ask ourselves? Where are we going, right? That's the clarity layer. Everybody's asking that question in your organization every day. Where are we going? Why are you asking me to do this? Where are we going? That's the clarity layer. That's the top of the funnel, right? The other part of the clarity layer is also the second question, which isn't how do we get there? That's the question that most people ask. But the second question truly is, yeah, but where are we on the map? So the first thing you do when you pull into a parking lot, if you're going for a hike, what's the first thing you look for? It's the "You Are Here" sticker, right? And if you really want clarity, it's we want to go here, and we're here right now. Okay, now we have clarity. A lot of people in your organization love the clarity layer. They want to talk about the clarity layer. That's the only thing they want to talk about, right? The alignment layer is strategy. That's okay, how do we do it? Which path are we going to take? We're starting here. We want to be there. So which path is the best way for us to get there, right? That's the alignment layer. And then the last layer is the execution layer, which is, do we have our water bottles? Do we have our backpacks? All right, are we in condition to hike? Are you guys coming with me? Let's go. Who's doing what by when, right? In every one of those facets, those 3 layers exist. And in every meeting you're in, those 3 layers exist. And more often than not, miscommunication shows up when you have your execution person asking execution questions of a clarity layer person. Right? In my organization, my number 2 is an amazing executor. She's like alignment down and I'm alignment up. And I'll be talking about an idea and I'll be saying, hey, you know what I think we should do? I think we should do this. I think we should move it this way. I think we should do whatever. And she's like, all right, let's document it. I'm like, hold on. We haven't even made that decision yet. I don't know why. But she's like ready to go. So we're having 2 different conversations, even though we're talking about the same thing. So when it comes to the facets, or it comes to an organization, or it comes to how we lead, it's paying attention to, okay, well, where do we feel really solid? Do we have the clarity layer covered? Do we have the alignment layer covered? Do we have the execution layer covered? Any one of these things, and also are we communicating about those things effectively? And I would imagine if you go into your next meeting with that baseline knowledge, you might identify, oh, I'm totally a clarity person, or I'm totally an executor. Just listen for what the person across the table and the other people in the room are saying. You might be like, oh, that's totally an execution thing. I'm notoriously bad at not paying attention to the execution. I'm like, wait, hold on. We don't need to talk about that. Yes, we do. We absolutely need to talk about that. And I need to get out of my own way to listen to those folks, right? So anyway, I started rambling at the end. I'm delaying fuzzy rainbows, but
It's beautiful.
oh, thank you.
It's not very close.
All right, well, I guess.